Coming up on The Returned.
It was Mother's Day 2007, and we were driving. I fell asleep while driving. I turned my wheel to bring my SUV back up on the highway. The wheels lifted off the ground and we started rolling, and we rolled all the way across 2 lanes of highway. Everything was dark. I could hear my son next to me crying. I was looking around the car and I just knew our life had changed forever. I was screaming, I killed my kids, I killed my kids. I heard a voice in my head. It was peaceful. Just calmly said,
Hi, and welcome to The Returned. The truth always follows you back. Hi, and welcome to The Returned, a place where we share near-death stories, out-of-body experiences, spiritual awakenings, signs from spirit, and the journeys of healers and lightworkers from around the world. Today, we sit with Julie Clough, a mother, speaker, spiritual teacher, podcaster, whose life was forever changed after a tragic car accident claimed the lives of her 2 children. Julie, welcome to The Returned.
Thanks for having me.
You're so welcome. Julie, before we get to the heart of our conversation today, I always like to ground the audience in who you were before everything changed. So, who was Julie before this chapter of your life began? And did religion or spirituality play a role in your life or your upbringing?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I grew up in a high demand, high control religion, and that also brought me to spirituality. Sometimes people are religious, sometimes they're spiritual, sometimes they're both. I tended to be both. I had experiences with spirit as a young person. In my mid-20s, I had a very specific experience where I was woken up in the middle of the night. Spirit was talking to me. I had a full-on conversation. They gave me instructions as to what to do. And I won't go into the details of that, but I did what they said to do, and I got so much confirmation that it was the right thing to do. So I felt very led my whole life, but I was also living underneath this shadow or this conditioning that was associated um, with my religious upbringing. I don't regret my religious upbringing, but I did allow it to define all of my spiritual experiences. And then I had a lot of loss in my life. I had gone through a divorce. I had my brother had passed by suicide. There were just a multitude of different things that had happened in my life that were loss and grief related. And I had, like I said, gone through a divorce, remarried. I had 3 children from my first marriage. I remarried. We had 3 children. We were raising them together as this big Brady Bunch family. And yeah, and then at that point in my life, I started to relax. I started to feel like maybe all the really hard stuff is behind me. Because I used to joke to my friends that I stood in the wrong line in heaven. That I stood in all the lines of like, "Oh, yeah, I'll do that. Oh, yeah, I'll do that. Oh, yeah, I'll do that." And I'm like, "How do I, change the contract? How do I shift my experience into a more joyful, more rewarding experience?" And it wasn't that I wasn't having joyful, rewarding experiences. It's just there was a lot of loss and a lot of challenges in my life before this event. So I was really talking myself into relaxing, not waiting for the next shoe to drop, and then the next shoe dropped. Yeah.
And how do you feel about taking us back to that day and walking us through what happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were living in Houston, Texas at the time, north of Houston, and I was traveling with my 3 youngest children. My son James was in the front seat, next to me. He was 12. My daughter Carrie was 10. She was in the back seat with her little brother David, who was 8. So my 3 youngest children were with me. We were traveling to visit grandparents. Our 3 older children, I mean, my oldest was in college, and, they were busy with work and other commitments, so it was just me and the 3 younger children, and it was Mother's Day. It was Mother's Day 2007, and we were driving to, like I said, visit grandparents, and about halfway through that afternoon, I fell asleep while driving and woke up between the eastbound and westbound lanes of highway, and the crazy part is I never felt tired that day. I felt great. We were having a great trip. It was better than I expected. When you're traveling with kids, you just don't know what to expect. But it had been such a good day, and to wake up bouncing in the median on the grass, uh, beside the highway was just so shocking. And so when I turned my wheel to bring my SUV back up on the highway, the wheels lifted off the ground and we started rolling, and we rolled all the way across 2 lanes of highway into the grass on the other side. When we landed, and I realized much later that I had lost time, like, I had been knocked out while we were rolling. At the time, I don't know that I recognized that, but the first thing I remember consciously is that I couldn't see anything. Everything was dark. So my eyesight wasn't there, but I could hear my son next to me crying, so I knew he was alive. Like, literally, when you're in an accident like that, you're just like, "Did anybody survive?" And I had this panic. Like, how can I turn back the hands of time? There was just this absolute panic in me. And as my eyesight returned, I was looking around the car and I just knew our life had changed forever. I didn't know what the outcome was going to be, but I knew our life had changed forever. I could see all the destruction. And as I was looking around, then I noticed that Carrie and David had been thrown from the car, and they were what felt like yards away from me on the side of the highway where we were, and I was physically, emotionally stunned and in shock, and I was screaming, "I killed my kids, I killed my kids." I mean, it breaks my heart when I think about it because I have my 12-year-old son in the car next to me, and what a trauma. I mean, the accident alone is a trauma, but then hearing your mom yell that, like, that's really, really painful for me to remember doing that, but that was the shock and the terror and the fear that I was in. And it was, 2 ambulance showed up, they took my son that was in the car with me, they took us by ambulance on stryker boards to the hospital, and they took my son and my daughter, who had been thrown from the car, David and Carrie, to a totally different hospital. And so because it was small country, like, we were on the border of Alabama and Mississippi, and they were small country, like, hospitals, um, or I should say smaller hospitals. It wasn't a big city hospital. And so I was laying in the hospital again, totally freaked out, totally overcome with what had happened, and I kept asking people about David and Carrie, and no one was giving me any answers. But I knew when I was in the car that they either both survived or they both had passed. There was something in me that knew that they were either both gone or they were both here. But I also knew in my heart that if they were here, that they were going to have significant physical, challenges, and it was later that day. I don't know what the timing was exactly, but it was later that day that I found out that they had passed in the accident. Um, Also, I had this and again, timing is a little squirrely because of mm, how I was feeling and what I was experiencing, but sometime later that day or the next following day, I remember having this overwhelming feeling that David and Carrie were okay, that they were happy, that they were fine, that they were, that they were and what the words that came to my mind is that they were eternally safe. Here's the thing I know now, we're all eternally safe. But with my religious background, right, it had this kind of that connotation to it. But there were a few things that happened during the accident that it took me a long time to understand, but while the car was rolling, when we first started rolling, I heard a voice in my head. It was calm, it was peaceful, but this voice in my head, it was much like that spirit that had talked to me over the years, just calmly said, "Bring your arm in." And I don't know how, but somehow I had the ability to do that. I brought my arm in and I learned of 2 people afterwards, I learned of 2 people who had lost their arm in a similar rollover accident. So then your brain goes to, okay, well, if that spirit can come to me and say, "Hey, bring your arm in," that same spirit could have said, "Hey, Julie, you're getting tired. Pull over, take a rest." But it didn't. The other thing that happened is while I was laying in the hospital, so by this time I'm at the hospital, I'm in the emergency room, all the chaos of the emergency room, all the panic that was in me, all the trauma that I had just experienced was in me. I was feeling it, all the adrenaline, all of that. But I was having these experiences, and the only thing I can say is it's almost like an out of body experience where I was taken out of that environment of the emergency room and into an environment where I was with Jesus. And we were standing in a field, and there were wildflowers, and there were mountains all around. And as I say this, tears are coming again. But he was just there with me, and there were no words exchanged that I can recall, but his presence was just calm and peace, and there was this direct eye contact where he was just holding me in his gaze while he held my hands. And I felt like I was just held in this peace, and I felt that peace. And then I would come back to the emergency room, and I don't recall how many times this happened, but there were a few times where I was, like, in the emergency room, and then I was back with Jesus, and I was in the emergency room, and I was back with Jesus. And the best way I can describe this, the best way that I've found to describe it is, like, if you're at a movie theater, you know how immersive a movie theater can be, and you're watching this horrific war scene, and then all of a sudden it just splits to a beautiful love scene, where 2 people are just gazing into each other's eyes, and there's so much love and there's so much peace, and that's what was happening. I was going from this very distressed environment into this very peaceful environment and back and forth. And that was really hard for me to integrate all of that afterwards because I was dealing with a lot of PTSD from being the driver of the car. I was dealing with complex grief, from feeling so much responsibility for what had happened. It was really, really painful and really challenging. And my brain on grief was a mess, I will say. Yeah.
That is I have absolutely no words. I I don't even want to imagine what that would have felt like actually.
Yeah.
And the feeling of it being you feeling it's, what you've done,
Mhm.
carrying that burden with you. Do you still feel like that today, or has it changed?
Which changed, like, it's the whole 180. It's the entire 180. I have an understanding now of what happened. I have an understanding of the plan before it happened. I have communication with my children. I have communication with my brother who passed before this. I now communicate for others. I communicate with the angels. I channel the angels. I do mediumship work where I help people become connected with their spirit teams or their loved ones on the other side of the veil. Like, everything has shifted and changed. And one of the things that happened, just kind of moving forward a little bit, 5 months out of the after the accident, I was still in just obviously still in tremendous pain, still all dealing with all the symptoms of grief and PTSD and so forth. And I walked into a drugstore and I saw Halloween costumes that they were just hanging up. And I saw this costume, immediately thought of my daughter Carrie and thought, "Oh, she would love this." Well, that's my humanness that still hasn't integrated that they are gone. And so I would have these experiences where I would think of them or think of like, "Oh, I wanna get that for them," or, "I wanna fix this dinner," because they would, and then the shock would come in. It's like a split second, and the shock came in and hit me again. There would be no Halloween for them that year. And in my head, I said, "Why did this have to happen?" And that voice came in and said, "They're right where they're supposed to be." And so I answered the voice and I said, "But why did it have to happen this way?" Which is such an interesting question, like the whole dialogue. And I said, "Why did it have to happen this way?" Because I was carrying all the guilt, the shame, the self-hatred, literal self-hatred that I had. And that voice said, "How would you have liked it to happen?" And when you're asked a question, your mind can't help but operate like a computer and answer the question. And so in my mind, I started scanning for another way for that to have happened, which makes no sense, but that's what my brain did. And I can't imagine a question that was more beautiful, more timely, and more helpful, because I realized there was no good answer to that question. There was no good answer to that question. And it was these experiences, the spiritual experiences that happened within all the pain that eventually led to healing. And it was grief is part of the healing process. And we tend to, as people, and I worked in the grief field after this for a number of years, and as people, we tend to want to push the grief away, and I could go into so much about that, but and I won't right now. But another thing that happened was a couple of years after the accident, both of my oldest two daughters were away at college. I had two teenage boys at home because my son who had turned 12 is, now like 14, and my other son was like 17, and I'm looking at their life in the last 2 years with this mom who's completely checked out. I couldn't emotionally be there. I was there for them, but I wasn't. As you can imagine, I was kind of a shell of myself. And I was in my house again asking questions in my head, like, I was just feeling so badly that they were growing up in such a different household than their older sisters had. And again, in my head, rehearsing, like, how sad it is that they were growing up in this different household and how it wasn't fair to them. And that voice came again and said, "They signed up for this too. This is part of their life experience too. They agreed to this." And that was such a huge revelatory experience because then all of a sudden I'm looking at it and I'm going, well, this isn't just about my experience and my kids who passed experience. This is about everybody that it touches. It's about the people listening to this right now.
That's right.
It's about everybody that this story touches. And I had a realization much, much later when I started to I think my angels brought it back to my attention. They're like, "Julie, you lost time in that accident. Don't you wonder what happened during that time that you were knocked out?" And I began to have this remembrance of rising above the accident with David and Carrie and saying goodbye to them. And what doesn't make sense to me right now, even as I share that, is my memory of it is so peaceful, which makes no sense. It makes no sense. But it felt like, and I can't remember any words that were spoken, it's just the feelings and the experience of it. But it's this feeling of purpose. It's this feeling of, we planned this. This is part of the plan. And I also had, and again, I don't remember anything that was spoken or I don't remember anything that was shared with me, but I do have a remembrance also of rising beyond the accident and having a I I don't even know what you call it, an encounter with the council, the council that I have learned that I'm connected with. And so, um, yeah, and again, I don't have you know, we are such interesting creatures, aren't we? Because we are souls. Yeah, we are light beings that are encased in this body or vice versa, depending on how you look at it. And we're having this physical experience, but we're also like really have this huge capacity and we have all this understanding that we don't remember. And so all the things that come to us, the truths that settle deep in our soul are like a remembrance. Rather than a learning, it's a remembrance.
I agree with that.
Yeah. 3 years after the accident, I was tanking. I was doing really poorly. The self-hatred that I was carrying was crushing me. It was absolutely crushing me. And, in a very odd way, I ended up in London, and we took a side trip to Stonehenge, which I learned much, much later, years later, is considered the heart chakra of the earth. So what a great place for a mom who lost 2 children. And the day that we were there, I don't usually share this part of it, but the day that we were there, it was so cold. It was like the end of April, beginning of May. So it was about a weekish before the 3rd anniversary of the accident. And it was so bitterly cold and the wind was blowing and we were wrapped up in coats and we and I was with my husband and my daughter and we were huddled in the bus going, "Do we really wanna go out there? Do we really wanna go out there?" But we did. We bundled up. The pictures of us are ridiculous, like, we're all bundled up, we've got hoods on our heads. And we walked all the way around Stonehenge, and we got back on the bus, and we left, and then a week later, this special prayer was offered me at my church, and by 24 hours after that, the darkness, the tangible darkness that I'd been feeling lifted and a new life began. It was
Amazing.
an awakening like I can't even describe.
Yeah, a very hard, heavy awakening,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Julie, why do you think this experience happened to you? I know you talked about why it had to happen this way and asking Jesus, why did it have to happen this way? But why do you think the experience happened to you? And what do you really feel you learned from this experience?
Oh, I could take 20
Probably
hours
a lot.
answering that
I
question.
bet. I bet.
But I'll give you the brief version of it. I really feel like and I often say this, I feel like David and Carrie had a mission to bring light here to the earth, to be here for only a short time. I can remember holding Carrie. I have very specific memories of holding her on my lap and thinking, "You are too good for this world." She is such a beautiful soul, and when I connect with her today, it's like connecting with an angel. I'm not connecting with a 10-year-old girl. I'm connecting with a very mature spirit. And she and her brother were so close, and that's why I said, as soon as the accident happened, I had this knowing that they were either both here or both gone. And even before the accident happened, I was having these really odd experiences where I was feeling like something was coming, and I was feeling this heaviness, and I was feeling sadness, and I had some very specific experiences that happened, and they didn't make any sense. But that was my soul knowing that this was on the horizon, that this was going to happen. So I often tell people, like, I could have chosen to be their mom for 8 and 10 years and taken on this assignment of bringing their light and their love to the world, or I could have chosen out of this experience and somebody else could have taken that role. But for whatever reason, I chose to step into that role, and I did. And then, um so in 2007, the accident happened. 3 years later, like, almost to the day, my awakening happened. So I like to say, before the accident, I was asleep. After the accident, I died, and then 3 years later, I was awakened, and I a couple years after that, I met a couple through my mom, and I had just been introduced to them. We were having lunch, and this man had gone through some real challenges with mental health, and he had found some answers for himself that had helped him balance his system, and he was helping other people who were dealing with what he had dealt with previously. And at this lunch, my mom turned to me and said, "Julie, tell them your story." And I just I sunk into my seat. I'm like, I can't tell you my story. Like, it just felt so heavy. I could feel the heaviness as I talk about it. I just remembering how that felt. And so I, reluctantly shared a little bit about what had happened and the kids passing and the awakening. I didn't use that terminology, but the healing that I had experienced. And as we were leaving, when we got up to leave from the table, this man came behind me. He put his hand on my arm, and I turned around and he said to me, "You're supposed to do something with this." And it was like a lightning bolt. It was delivered. It was just words, but it was like the angels, my higher self, everything came in to confirm what he was saying. And what's fascinating about that is for probably the last year before this happened, I had been having these thoughts that I needed to share my story. And I thought, I'm not going to share my story. This is not, I mean, uh, that would just sounded crazy to me. And I would dismiss it every time. I'd say, nobody's interested in my story. And I would dismiss it. But when he said that to me, it was as if God was standing in front of me saying, "You're supposed to share your story." And I could no longer deny it. And it took me a while to, again, find what that was or what that would look like. And initially, what that looked like was I became a coach. I became, um, I trained in grief and grief recovery. I wrote a curriculum around it. I brought a lot of clients through that curriculum, watched their life change. I developed a training to help other coaches bring grief, healing into their practice with the same curriculum. I've since sold that part of my business. Somebody else has. And it's so beautiful because I look back on my life and I can like connect all the dots and I can see how when I first started that company and that particular um, iteration of my path, I remember, like, I very specifically I gave it a name. It wasn't under my it wasn't julieclough.com, which is where I'm at now. It was, Build a Life After Loss. I had a podcast, I did a whole program around it, but I remember very specifically having this knowing that it was going to live past me. Now, at the time, I thought, well, I'm not a spring chicken. I'm gonna I'm gonna pass at some point. Somebody else will take over. But that happened much quicker than I thought it would. It was a few years later, and so that has been beautiful to have somebody and just it just like it's so beautiful to just see how things develop and even the channeling that I do now is I was um Yeah, I was having these experiences. They're so funny because when I started doing the grief coaching, I was having these experiences when I was working with clients where, because a lot of the clients I worked with were grieving because of a death of a loved one. And as they were sharing with me their experiences and how they were feeling and so forth, I would hear, and I put it on this side because this is where I hear them. I would hear their loved ones in my ear saying, "I don't want them to feel that way. They shouldn't feel guilty." And giving me even instructions on how to help their mom or their husband or their daughter or and and I would use what they were sharing with me, and it was always so helpful. But I didn't know how to communicate to my client that, "Hey, your son's talking in my ear." Or your wife is talking in my ear, or your grandma is talking in my ear. I didn't know how to share that. So I never told anybody, but I became a very, very intuitive coach. And all these subtle energies would come in to assist me in the work that I was doing, and it was just beautiful to do that work.
So before the accident, you had had a few spiritual encounters, a few spiritual
Yes,
experiences. It sounds like this experience you had just kind of activated it, even more. Is that a correct statement, you think?
100%. Yeah,
Yeah. And
100%. Yeah, because
and then
even
you came face to face with Jesus.
yeah, and I still
Like,
have conversations with him.
my goodness, like, could this is all like you think about it and it's like I'm curious and I don't mean to cut you off, but were there signs or synchronicities or even moments where your experience felt like you knew was going to happen?
That came much later. So, before the accident, like I said, I was having these premonitions, but I didn't know what they were. And the accident happened, then I'm having these miraculous experiences within the accident, after the accident, but I'm also like deep, deep, deep in grief and very disconnected because of my deep, deep grief. And somehow in their miraculous way, they were able to communicate with me on occasion. And then afterwards, but again, like all of my experiences were, I would say, defined by my religious conditioning. And so each experience that I had, I was trying to fit within my religious background until eventually they just no longer would fit. They just didn't fit anymore, and I finally deconstructed, from religion, but that happened much later. And I share that because I was where I was supposed to be. When when I was doing the coaching, when I started my coaching business, and I was by that time I was in my, later 50s, and I'm thinking, and I would have these conversations with God. I'm like, why am I just now finding my purpose? And I remember one day asking that question, and I heard, you've always been living your purpose. Now think about that for a minute. You know, we are all in this moment living our purpose. And we are all being encouraged in the next iteration, in the next step, in the next path, in the next thing. So that was so revelatory to me. Again, you've always been living your purpose. And so I relaxed a little bit. And I also received a message that I would be doing this work not only while I'm here, but once I passed, I would continue to be involved in this work. In fact, more recently, as I've become closer and closer, obviously, with the channeling and so forth, and I'm doing that, several times a week now, and realizing now, which I didn't realize at the time, that I'm always connected. Like, we're always connected to our spirit team. But I didn't understand that because from a religious standpoint, I had been taught that when I'm doing good, or I'm, you know, allowing the spirit in, that the spirit comes. But if I do something I shouldn't be doing, or if I'm in the wrong place, the wrong time, the spirit leaves. No, it's my channel. My channel is either open or closed. So it's, I live with an open channel now versus a closed channel where I think that every condition of my life is either opening or closing it. It's more about my intention and my attention. Spirit's always there. Our spirit team is always there.
So, beyond that, when did you first hear from your children the signs? And can you tell us what type of signs you were getting?
Yeah, so initially, the way that was happening, and this was even happening in my grief, there would be kind of e high emotional experiences where I would feel them in the room. I just knew they were there. I knew they were there helping. Like, for example, one of those was when my oldest daughter, actually, her wedding was 7 months after the accident. She was married, and at the wedding, I felt them in the room. The year after, and I'm glad you asked this question because this is such a beautiful turning point experience for me. On the anniversary of their passing, our 2 oldest daughters are off at college. And they surprised us and came home for the weekend. We didn't know they were coming. And as I sat in church that week with my 4 living children with me on Mother's Day, because that's the anniversary of the accident, and I sat on that bench with my 4 living children, and I could feel my 2 deceased children with us. I was filled with so much gratitude, like gratitude beyond what we would typically feel as a human. I was filled with so much gratitude for being a mother, for having this experience of being the mom of my children who have passed and of being the mom of the children who are still here. And in that way, it kind of bridged me into this space of being more present for my living children, and not, and this is weird to say, but a lot of times when a parent loses a child, they kind of center that child that they've lost, and there's nothing wrong with that, and there's a time period for that. But they kind of center that child who is lost, and the children who are still here start to feel like they're secondary to the child who has passed, because now the child who has passed is like an angel, and then, they're and they feel like they can never live up to the child who's passed. But in that experience, it all felt united, and in a way that I can't even, express, but it changed the anniversary of the accident for me. It changed it to where Mother's Day is not this heavy day for me. Now, in the first few years after they died, yes, I would have the grief experiences and so forth, but I will also say I don't experience a lot of grief now over this. I don't. I think we need new language around this. A lot of people talk about grief lasts forever, and that's really hurting us thinking it lasts forever.
It's
Be
also programming us.
Yeah, for sure.
That's what it's doing.
And
I
then
lost
people
my
feel
mother 5
forced.
months.
Yeah.
That's right. I lost my mother 5 months ago, and, in the last year, I had lost my stepfather, my grandmother, and my mom,
Wow.
and it was heavy, extremely, but, I what I chose to do was like, I was there with mom when she was transitioning, but she also gave me a gift of coming to me before she was transitioning. So I knew 3 months in advance that she was dying, from a visit, out-of-body visit,
Mhm.
and so I was able to spend the time. However, I mean, I was still upset. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
my mother, my best friend, my fiercest warrior, seriously. Um,
she
it
still
was
is.
weird to imagine her not, um, on this earth with me. Before I go into tears, it was really weird because, just before I got on with you, I had a really strong thought of her, and I wrote something down on the top of my page. And I looked at it and then I closed my eyes. And I can always tell when she's near because it brings these really high emotions for some reason right now because it's still new.
Mhm.
Now, where are they now, in your opinion? And where do we go when we die?
I feel very unqualified to answer that question. Because because it from our human perspective, we have ideas. Like, I've been a student, I lost my brother, to, like, suicide, like I mentioned, in my late 20s. And so I had always been drawn to near-death experiences, trying to understand what his experience was like, and so I have really, really appreciated near-death experiences, which gives us the tiniest bit of insight into experience on the other side. But, like I mentioned before, when I connect with my daughter, I feel her as an angelic presence. She's very, um, high high dimensional, that's not the right term for it, but, like, a very high energy. And when I connect with my son, still comes across very playful, they were both such loving children, and he was so playful. Oh my goodness. And when I was going through my mediumship training, he shows up all the time. He would show up all the time, It's just a playground for him. It's all just a playground. And they're part of this work. They're part of what we're doing here on earth. And I actually had a guest on my show, Light the Day, not too long ago, who said something about, like, when we grieve, we're holding our loved ones back in their transition and in their progress. And I have heard that concept before, but I don't know that we have that power. I feel like that's not fully accurate, and yet there's something to that, because one of the first messages I received was from a son who who actually asked his mom to let him go. Like, this is part of the plan. This is my time to move forward. But I think they do that from this perspective of it's in our best interest and their best interest, but there's no timetable on it. You where I talk about and again, it's our humanness. Like, we have to go through a linear process. Everything I needed to heal from what happened in that accident was available to me at the moment of the accident. Everything. All the understanding, all the, understanding that it was part of our plan, all the understanding that this was going to carry me forward into my next iteration, my next path, all of that was present because it's all present. Everything is present in the moment, but my humanness, the physical aspect of me, needed time to integrate, move through it, process, and so forth. So when we go through something hard, everything we need for healing is present, but also we live in linear space. We live in linear space and time. And I will say this is the one thing that I am really, really, want to communicate to people is on the other side, they're not living within the same constraints of time and space. So when you call on your mom, because she's just a thought away, she's present. So she's just a thought away. When we call on someone we love from the other side, we never have to worry about taking them away from someone else or bringing their energy to us, and therefore we're limiting their energy to someone else because they're living in a very different dimension where time and space is not what we experience here. That's okay. Yeah.
If I understand you not being qualified, feeling that way. Now, have you ever been told where the other side is?
Not directly, but I will say I've had experiences it to me, this is the way that I feel it because it's all it is. So even as I go through the files of my brain to answer your question, I come back to all the experiences I've had with the spirit team, with, loved ones on the other side, and they're present, you know? An uncle, a father-in-law, a daughter, an aunt, they come in with that energy of who they were here so that the person sitting in front of me knows who's here, and then their, um they share their messages, which are so timely, and so often so I have a background in grief, so when I'm reading for someone, tears don't bother me at all, and I can say 80% of people who come to me are crying when that loved one shows up, because it's very emotional, and then this loved one will say, "I see things very differently now." So they're bringing in how they were here. The places where they were angry, the places where life was hard, or the places where it was joyful, it was wonderful, and so forth. But then they're sharing. It's like I'm able to connect to that energy of who they were here, but also able to connect to the higher self of that person. And then they're sharing how their perspective has changed being on the other side and seeing things from that greater perspective. So when we answer like, "Where are they?" They're right here. And they're
That's what I
also
was thinking too.
yeah, and they're also the universe is their playground. So depending on what their if, if I use myself as an example, you're receiving that message that I'd be doing this work on the other side as well. When I was writing my grief program, it was Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross that was with me, who is we talk about the 5 stages of grief. She's the person that pioneered those concepts. and she was with me while I was writing that program. And it's not that she lives in my house 24/7, it's just her presence is able to be here. Um, yeah, so it's all and. It A few years ago, so after all this had happened and I'd gone through this healing experience, and then and you asked, like, how they show up for me, and I would have these experiences where I would feel them there. It's like you know them, you know their energy, and a lot of times our loved ones who have passed on the other side are bridges for us between us and our spirit team, because not only do you have your mom and your stepdad and these people who love you on the other side, you have a whole team that's with you. So, a few years after that, I started seeing 12s everywhere. My birthday was on the 12th of the month, and it was actually the day before the accident. So, my birthday was the same weekend as the accident on Mother's Day. So, there was a lot of energy around that weekend. But I started seeing 12s everywhere. And I was, I didn't mention this before, but I was a very linear thinker. I was, math was my favorite subject. Algebra was my absolute favorite subject. I've been known to buy an algebra book from a used bookstore for fun, which is weird. And so, people would talk about signs that they would see from the other side, and I would be, oh, that's nice for you, right? But I wasn't connected to that. But all of a sudden, I was seeing 12s everywhere, and I couldn't deny it. Like, it got to the point where, like, okay, this is insanely ridiculous. Like, there's something to this, and I would start asking my more woo-woo friends, like, "What does this mean?" And I started getting connected to the angelic realm and to the angel numbers and to the understanding of these signs and synchronicities and connecting with gemstones and, eh, like oils and different things, and I became more esoteric in that way. Well, my husband and I had gone on a trip to Mexico, and we decided to do a whale watching trip. Never been on a whale watching trip before, ever. And we were out on the boat, and first of all, I was really grumpy. It was the middle of the afternoon. I was tired. This boat that we were on, it barely qualified as a boat. It was more like an oversized life raft. I'm like, "What are we doing?" We weren't seeing anything. We're halfway through this whale watching trip, and in my head, I'm thinking, "This is going to be a bust. This is not going to be a good whale watching trip." And in that moment, I heard that voice in my head that said, "Julie, you have angels." So I began in my head repeating this mantra. Thank you, angels, for bringing the whales close to the boat. Thank you, angels, for bringing the boat close to the whales. And within 10 minutes, we were surrounded. We had whales on our left, we had whales to the front, we had whales to the right, and then a whole pod of dolphins started swimming next to the boat, and they were playing in the water. Now, I grew up in Florida. I was a SeaWorld fan. I've never seen a show like this. I was so filled with bliss. It was very much like an out of body experience. The bliss was I couldn't even pull out my phone to take pictures. Who knows what I was saying, because I imagine I was standing there on the side of the boat saying, "Oh, wow. Oh, wow." Like, it was immersive. It was an immersive experience. And I remember our boat, guide, our excursion guide saying, "It's time to go back. Like, this has been fantastic, but it's time to go back." And as he said that, the whale started to swim off, and one whale lifted his tail and started slapping the water like they do, the goodbye, which is not actually a goodbye, but that's what it looks like to us, right? And it was the next day I received the message to start teaching about angels. So I came home and immediately started doing webinars and classes on angels and teaching about angels. I received messages later from my daughter that she had been part of that whale experience. And then later from my son at a different time, he said he was part of, he's like, "Don't forget me. I was there too."
Oh my goodness. That sounds unforgettable.
My husband too I didn't get pictures because I was just there, I was present, right? But I received this very specific message to start teaching about angels, and it was within that teaching that then I became aware of the Akashic records, and I decided to do a training on the Akashic records, and it was in that training where the channeling came online, and I thought, "Where did this come from?" Like, all of these things were just happening, and looking back now, I know they were part of my experience and part of where I'm the pathway of my experience, but nobody could have told me 5 years ago that this is what I would be doing now. I wouldn't have believed them.
Julie, what practices and habits or even perspectives help you stay connected to peace and wisdom? And how does that help you connect with angels, Jesus, your children?
Yeah. Well, it's like I said, I was like, "Where did this come from?" This vocal channeling? I thought, "Where did that come from?" And then they reminded me a few months later after the vocal channeling came online, 'cause it came so easily and so quickly, and I was just floored. And 5 years before, I would have thought or maybe longer than that, I would have thought, "This is weird, this is" because of, again, my religious conditioning. But then they brought me back to my journals where I was writing questions and I literally found my journal. I keep looking this way because it's on this shelf. I found the journal from 2010 when at the beginning of the journal, I was writing some things that my therapist was asking me to because I was dealing with so much pain, so much grief, and I see those pages with all that pain, and there's not a lot there because I was rarely doing what she was asking me to do. It was beyond my capacity, and there's a couple of empty pages, and there's empty time, and then all of a sudden, like, a month after my awakening, I began journaling and asking questions and just writing from this prompted space of what to write, and that developed over time, and I continued that practice, and I was continually doing that. Um, I'm a musician. I grew up playing the piano. I taught piano lessons for a time, and music would come to me with messages, and I would write that in my journal, and I would write the messages that were coming through the music. Um, and so journaling has been a big piece of that. Now I do it mostly on my computer because it's the way that I can capture it faster because it comes through so quickly now, and there's so much of it. I have pages and pages and pages and pages of personal journaled, channeled messages, and and then I began sharing those with people on Instagram, on my YouTube channel. That's been more recent. It's really only been in the last 3 months that I have maybe gotten brave enough, I will say, to share my channeled messages, and so I will channel a message, usually on Sundays, a longer message, and break it down and share what the experience was like to channel it and what they're sharing with us and the insights that they're sharing. So I actually I live channel that message, um, well, I should say record my channeling, and then I go back and kinda break it down. So, yeah, it's been a journey, and coming out of the spiritual closet was no small feat for me because I had to deconstruct religion in the process of all that and everything else. So, yeah, it's been a real journey.
It sounds like a very purposeful, fulfilling one.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Unfortunately, the pain that came along with it, but there's a purpose always, isn't there?
Well, the pain and the equal amounts, and I would say even, greater amounts of joy that have come after. And being connected with my kids and recognizing, no one passes before their time. And we have a lot of phrases like children shouldn't die before their parents and things like that, but in reality, they do.
Yes.
And so we have to hold that space for what is, and that we don't all come in, and I've thought a lot about this a lot. In some ways, it feels like it might make more sense for all of us in a soul family or in a family group. We all come in at the same time and we all leave at the same time, and everybody can be happy because we're always, always together. But it's really in those spaces of birth and death that we intersect with the other side in a way that we wouldn't otherwise. And it's often people like myself who have had these really tough experiences of losing someone close to us that then enter into the purpose of our life of being what my guides call an in-betweener. They call me an
Mm,
in-betweener, and when they used that term
nice.
the first time, I was like, "What exactly is that?" And it's like we are that bridge between here and the other side, and I don't pretend to it's just like when you were asking, like, what are they doing on the other side, and what happens when we go to the other side? I have these glimpses, and I can share the glimpses, but I don't pretend to have the all the knowledge of it. And I often use the story of the blind men and the elephant, and I don't know if you're familiar with that
Yes.
parable or that story, but, the blind man that has a hold of the has a hold of the tail says, an elephant is a rope, and the blind man that feels the side of the elephant says, "The elephant is a wall." What they're interacting with is a portion of the elephant. And while we're here in this iteration, we are here to be having a human experience. I am I'm an in-betweener in that I have these experiences with the other side, and I can bring some light to that, and I can help people connect to that other side. And what I've found is as I've connected with the other side, my life just gets better. Better and better, and as each of us learn to do that, our lives just get better and better. I often say, like, when I'm meeting with clients, I'm like, I'm always putting myself out of business because what I'm doing is I'm trying to teach people because we can all do this. And it's not gonna
Right.
look like what I'm doing where I'm here speaking about this or, and actively being a medium for people. Not everybody has to do that, but we are all connected to the other side because we are all spirit beings.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Julie, do you fear death today?
I don't.
No.
I don't. I think my fears are around living.
Right?
Yeah, and sometimes I fear the transition and what that might look like. Do we have am I is my experience to live with an illness for a long period of time or disability for a long period of time or some I fear that process, uh, and just being totally honest because
I think it's very normal for people to fear those things. They don't fear the actual where we go part, but it's the part what's happening to our bodies while we're still here in them,
exactly,
you know.
exactly, and as as I've connected with people on the other side, and just recently I had a client who came to me, and I'd worked with her before, but she'd had a more recent loss, and in which she had two family members who died in very tragic and painful circumstances. And she was very, very concerned about them. And what I have discovered is that when people, even my own children, when they passed in the car accident, whatever pain they experienced in that car accident, and many times, and even as I say that with my children, many times our spirit will leave our body before we actually physically transition. So we're not actually experiencing the pain of that death. And this particular client, you know, her loved ones had been murdered and in horrific circumstances. But as I feel into it, I feel them leaving their body before the actual action of the death. So we can rest assured that whatever pain our loved ones or we experience in the transition, that's very short-lived, and that they in fact, I was doing a reading for someone, just recently again, and her father was really interesting because he lived with a pretty painful condition for the last, I wanna say 3, 4 years of his life, and she really lost him before she lost him, because his mental capacity and so forth. But what he said was, that was just a blink of the eye for him. He was really reassuring her that even though it felt like this long, drawn out circumstances for him in her eyes, to him, it was just the blink of an eye, and he wanted her to remember him in those happier times, in those, e great experiences that they had had. And I wanna share another piece because this has been so beautiful to me. Again, I lost my brother under circumstances where he was responsible for his own passing, and I think because of that experience, I have many people come to me who have lost a loved one to something similar. One of the things that has come through again and again and again, and the first time it came through, I was really surprised. I'm no longer surprised by this because this message keeps coming through. But a lot of times, a loved one, a parent, a sibling, someone close to that person will feel so badly, like they should have done something or they could have done something to have changed what happened. And what has come through over and over again is that they were here longer than they would have been. It was the parent, it was the sibling, it was the friend who actually kept them here longer than they would have been here. So rather than feel guilt, we should feel grateful for the time that we had with them and connect with them on that level, knowing that they were dealing with physical or emotional conditions that caused their passing just like any other illness.
Yeah, society doesn't help on that note either because it has people scared of where they've gone because of an act, which I mean, I don't know is true or not true, but that's also what lands on the parents' plate or whoever's plate,
Well,
brothers,
it
sisters,
landed on
everybody,
me.
right?
Yeah,
They get scared now. They're, like, fearing that, "Oh my gosh, this is what he did because now we have been told this is what happens. You're going straight there, and that's it," right?
yeah.
Um,
And that's what I believed
that was
about
a
my
really good
brother
point.
for a long
Mhm.
time
Of course. Yeah.
until I deconstructed that piece that was a conditioned piece that I was living with, and then began to, communicate with him and knowing um, that he is well and good and whole, and we do, like, my dad went through really challenging circumstances in this life, his upbringing and so forth, and it challenged our relationship because of um, the way that he acted in this world because of his own upbringing. And when he passed, my overwhelming feeling, and this was in 2020, my overwhelming feeling is now he can heal. He's coming out of this body and this earthly experience, and he's going into a higher realm where he's surrounded by love and can begin to heal the pieces with him of him and understand his life here at a totally different level of understanding. why he did the things he did, why he experienced the things he did, and so forth. So what we can remember is that no matter what life a person lived here, when they go to the other side, it's all about healing and love and peace and calm. And you asked me about, my practices, and journaling is a big piece of that. Meditation is a big piece of that. But also, I don't live in 100% peace. I don't live in 100% like bliss and all that. I have these experiences and I can draw on those experiences and bring those feelings back into my presence here. And as we learn to quiet our mind and go into meditation and connect to our heart, and when we connect to our heart, we're connecting to all that is and the spirit and our divine connection to our higher self and all that is. And when we practice that, it becomes easier and easier to get back to that place of peace when we are knocked off balance and we are knocked out of our peace. And that's an important part of our experience here.
Absolutely. Beautiful. Beautiful. Julie, for those who feel called to learn more from you, can you share your services, projects, published works, and podcast, and where people can find you and connect?
Yeah, the best place to find me is julieclough.com. Everything is there, including links to my Instagram, where I like to show up, Facebook, YouTube. YouTube has been really fun for me more recently. I do have a podcast there, but you can also find it on other podcasts, if you prefer to listen to it rather than watch it. Uh, Light the day. But my on YouTube, it's at Julie Clough Coaching, and that's where you can find my channeled messages, my interviews with people on the the Day podcast, and just all the fun stuff that's going on. What I do for people, I do have a couple of courses on my website. I'm hoping to add to those in the, hopefully soon I'll be adding more to that. And I also offer mediumship readings. I offer spirit guidance sessions, and that's what I do on a regular basis. So yeah,
What a fun life.
yeah, exactly.
Julie, our last question. Everyone returns with a truth. What truth did you return with that you would want humanity to know right now?
Wow, that's a big question. One of the things I often share is to believe your spiritual experiences, because there have been times when I have stepped away from the experiences that I've had, and I've gone into the everything that's real is what's in front of me, and all of this is, I'm making this up in my head or whatever, right?
Right, right.
And when I have done that, my life shrinks and my joy shrinks and my essence of who I am shrinks. And so I hope that these conversations are helping anybody who's listening to really lean into the spiritual experiences that they're having. Lean into the beauty of your experiences. Your experiences are going to be different than mine. Um, and they're all beautiful and worth holding on to and learning from.
Thank you so much. Julie, I can't thank you enough for your courage, your honesty, and allowing us into one of the most sacred and difficult chapters of your life. Your story reminds us that love is not ended by loss, and that even through heartbreak, light can still find its way through. So thank
Absolutely.
you, right, for bringing your love, your light, and your truth here to the return today.
Thank you for having me.
And to everyone watching or listening, perhaps today's takeaway is this: love may change form, but it does not disappear. And sometimes the moments that break us open become the very moments that reconnect us to something greater than ourselves. Thank you for watching. And until next time, stay open, stay curious, and keep returning to the truth within you.